Evening, everyone. I'm well amplified. I'm Doug Ellendorf. I'm the Dean of Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to the Kennedy School and to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's event, The Continuing Challenges Faced by Arab Americans. And we are delighted that our featured speaker tonight is Dr. James Zogby. Jim Zogby is the co-founder and president of the Arab American Institute, which was established in 1985 to encourage Arab citizens to participate in political and civic life. The Institute conducts research on a range of policy issues related to Arab Americans and Arab-US relations. It serves as a resource for people in the government, in the media, political leaders, and community groups looking to learn about those issues. And we are just so pleased that Dr. Zogby could be with us to share his thoughts with us. We're also very fortunate tonight to have as our moderator Diana Eck, who is a professor at Harvard in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and in the School of Divinity. She is the professor of Comparative Religion and Indian Studies, and also the Frederic Wertham Professor of Law and Psychiatry in Society. She teaches, as I say, in both FAS and the Divinity School. She has led for 25 years now the Pluralism Project, which explores and interprets the religious dimensions of American immigration. And she is also, as you may know, the faculty dean of Lowell House. We're very pleased to have her here. I also want to thank the Kennedy School Arab Caucus and the Harvard Islamic Society for sponsoring this conversation tonight, and as always to the Institute of Politics for hosting us here in the forum. So with that, I'll get out of the way, and let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Zogby and Professor Eck. Thank you very much.
We spoke a couple of days ago on the phone and decided that rather than have this as a short talk followed by a moderated discussion, that we would just start right out with a discussion, and I think it's a good idea. In the meantime, I have received a copy of James Zogby's book, Arab Voices, What They Are Saying to Us and Why It Matters. And I'm just going to show it to you because if you haven't read it, this is an excellent book. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can buy it on a Kindle, which is what I did before I got the hard copy.
Also available on Amazon.
Also available, yes. So it is a wonderful thing to be able to enter into this discussion. One of the things that Dr. Zogby says toward the beginning of the book is that among the challenges that continue to face the Arab American community is the question of how one defines an Arab American. That is the biggest hurdle, in a sense, how to define oneself. And I think maybe we just start with that, as long as, and I'll cut you off if you go on for 15 minutes on this, because I know that this is a huge topic. But how do you define an Arab American? How do Arab Americans speak of themselves?
Number one, it's an honor to be here. My brother, I know, does some programs here. This is the first I've done. I was at the Arab Student Weekend last year, and it was great. It was very exciting with so many young people and so much interesting conversation. Arab American is an invention. It's an invention of an ethnic community that comes from diverse country backgrounds, diverse religion backgrounds, and diverse generational backgrounds. Everything from the Syrian Lebanese who came a century and a half ago, started coming a century and a half ago, to the very recent immigrants who've come in the last 15 years. It's heritage-based, and it's a voluntary association. If you want to be, you're in the community. If you don't want to be, you're not in the community. You opt in, you opt out. It's not a race category. It's an association of people who share a certain culture. People said to me over the years, they've said, well, do you model yourself after the Jewish community? I say, no, actually, I model myself after the Italian community because I grew up in an all-Italian neighborhood, and when I came to Washington, it was the National Italian American Foundation that first adopted me, and I was struck by their ability to network with each other and to hunt out young people who were Italian, who were running for office, and do something to support them, or Italian Americans who were getting themselves into a situation that they needed some support, and provide them with that kind of support. And I thought, I want to be able to do that. And I remember I was provoked at one point by Ralph Nader, who was been a friend of mine for decades. Somebody attacked him, a cabinet secretary in the Reagan administration, and said some awful anti-Arab things, and Ralph called me and said, I need you to defend me. And I thought, I can't. I don't have the resources to do it. We don't have the connections to do it. And so at one point I called Ralph and asked him to do something, and he said, look, on a Middle East issue that was controversial, you can guess what it was. And Ralph said, look, he said, I got General Motors trying to kill me, I got Ford trying to kill me. I don't need this as well. If you aren't able to help me, how can I help you? So I thought to myself, when we started the Institute, I want to create a vehicle that can help young Arab Americans and older Arab Americans and be a support network for them, raise money for them if they run for office, work for them, get them jobs in administrations when new administrations come in. And that's what we did. And we've brought together the recent immigrants who need that kind of boost and that kind of support, and their children, and we've fused them together with the other wing of the plane, which is the first, second, third generation who came over, like my dad, 1923, my folks, who want to be part of a community. And so it's sometimes uncomfortable. It's not always an easy mesh, but that's what building a community is about. It's supporting each other, helping each other, identifying with each other, and trying to overcome differences and make it work. That's the American story, and that's what we've been able to do.
So when this forum was first sort of talked about, at least the first call I got about it was we would focus on Islamophobia. Well, I thought, well, okay, that's a good and very timely topic. Then it sort of morphed into the issues and challenges facing Arab Americans, and I think that is an extremely important thing, that both Arab and Islam have had a kind of neon sort of flashing vector to them in public discourse. And so, of course, Islamophobia is something that affects Arab American community, and in relation, it certainly affects the Muslim community. I think both of us, in your book, you talk about 1995 and the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And one of the first calls I got in the Pluralism Project that day was from people in the press who said, I hear that there are Muslim communities in Oklahoma City. I said, sure, there are Muslim communities in Oklahoma City, and one should pay attention to this, but the word that was out on the street irresponsibly was that there's some Middle Eastern looking people who were seen in that area. And that was exactly one of the places that you began.
I actually tracked that story to CBS News almost immediately after the attack. Steve Emerson, who some of you may know, is a flake of the worst sort, a bigot who has made his stock in trade Arab baiting and morphed into Islamophobia. And he was on CBS News and he said, it's all the hallmarks of a Middle Eastern attack. As the day went on, it went from an expert said to it was. And I have a TV show. I had a TV show, a weekly television call-in show. At the time it was on the Arab Network of America, ANA it was called. And I did the show that night and I got a call from a family in Oklahoma City. And the guy called me and he said, I'm calling from Oklahoma City and there are people outside my house demonstrating against us. And he said, I don't know what to do, I'm frightened. And I said, call the police. He said, I don't think they'll help. Yeah, that kind of stuff It's like the telephone game
Yeah.
kids play. Well, it was the same sort of thing. In almost every one of these sort of incidents, there's some place it starts and then it builds and grows, like the after 9/11, the dancing on the roof stuff. There was a researcher at Princeton who went to every one of the communities where it was said that it happened, and now Donald Trump is actually running around the country saying the same thing.
It happened, yeah.
It never happened. They initially said it was Paterson, New Jersey. Never happened. Dearborn, never happened. But the story started on the Howard Stern radio show, a great source of news, in case you're wondering, and it grew from there. And so, yeah, that has been a problem. But let me just parse out Islamophobia and anti-Arab. To some degree, they're related, and to some degree, they're not. About a third, little less than a third of Arab Americans are Muslim. Most are Christian. Islamophobia is a phenomena that has been in Europe for the longest time. Europe confronted Islam as a civilization. It was a civilizational conflict. America didn't have the same relationship with Europe. In America, the initial bigotry was focused on Arabs, and it wasn't bigotry against an ethnicity, it was about an issue. It was after the '67 war, and Arabs became the advocates for the terrorists, for the Palestinians. And most of what we faced was that. So that my mom used to joke, if you'd been a podiatrist, she'd said you could rise to the top of your profession, but you had to go into politics and focus on Arab stuff. And so it was a problem. I mean, we had to fight to get acceptance. Democratic Party wouldn't talk to us for 4 years. It was very controversial to work with your people. If it hadn't been for Jesse Jackson and Ron Brown and then later Bill Clinton, we never would have gotten access to politics. But that has been an issue for us. And even till today, an Arab American can run for office and be silent on Middle East issues and go very far. But the minute you raise Middle East issues, you're typed and you are excluded and you are put into a very problematic situation. I have worked in the Democratic Party now for 30 years. I'm on the executive committee for 15 years. I chair the Ethnic Council. I chair the Resolutions Committee of the party for 8 years. Bernie Sanders appointed me to the Platform Committee. Headline in the Washington Post was, Sanders appoints Palestinian activist. Number one, I'm Lebanese. Number two, I was chair of the Resolutions Committee in the party, so it would be logical I'd be on the Platform Drafting Committee. I do this stuff. But that's how the Post saw it. And my wife and I were sitting at lunch the day after, and two people sitting in back of us saying, yeah, and that Sanders guy, he put that Palestinian guy on, and boy, that's really, So I turned around and I said, I'm the guy, and I'm eating my lunch with my wife. Please stop. And he said, oh, you're the guy. Look, I want to talk about this. And I said, I don't. So stop. But that's been an issue I mean, we know Arab Americans who've actually lost jobs because they'd speak out on the issue. Professors who get into trouble speaking out on the issue. First time I went to college teaching job, my PhD was in comparative religions, but I focused on, my dissertation was on the Palestinians, and I went to an interview and they said, well, we'd love you to teach religion, but you can't talk about the Middle East here. We have two people talking about Middle East. One was Jewish and the other was British. But the Arab guy couldn't because it was too controversial, they said. So that's been an issue with us. Islam is different, and Islam became a problem after 9/11 in a serious way. When we used to do our polling domestically about attitudes towards different groups, Muslim numbers were very high. It was an accepted thing. It was a different religion like Buddhism and Hinduism. People didn't know about it, but the fear associated with 9/11 then became the problem. So Arab American Muslims face a double whammy. And that's something that we have to contend with both, but parse them out. Each of them are equally serious, but you can be a Muslim, and there are Muslims who don't talk about foreign policy issues, and that's become acceptable. But raise the issue of the Middle East, and you get the double whammy. And so there is an issue here for us to separate out and work on, and it's something that has challenged us, but it has given us something to fight for. Acceptance of the faith the Muslim community, acceptance of the feelings and attitudes and beliefs of Arab Americans, and our right to participate in the political discourse of the country.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to the sort of genesis of some of these advocacy groups, I remember it was almost immediately after the Oklahoma City bombing that the Council on American-Islamic Relations really came into the public sphere. Because there were, at that point, quite a number of hate crimes and bombings and arsons and whatnot associated primarily with Muslim communities, not necessarily Arab, but Muslim in general. But then I think about the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. Now, I'm not quite sure when that started, but it was Avarice, was it?
I founded it. Jim Avarice and I founded it in 1980. And we initially founded the group was Abscam. It was FBI guys dressed up like Arabs with bags of money luring members of Congress into criminal activity. And when I met with the director of the FBI about it, I said, "Why'd you do it?" He said, "It was very hurtful to an entire culture." And he said, "Well, you know, you might be right," but he said, we needed something that was believable. Well, number one, if you saw the tapes, now, please pardon me, I know it's an election year and you may have your favorite members of Congress. They're not the brightest bulbs in the chandelier, some of these guys. You had these guys like in sheets, speaking with an accent that was weird, and holding money and whatever, and the members of Congress were like, all they saw was the green and the sheets, and they were like, "Yeah, give me some of that." And it was pretty damn awful. And so that was one of the things that pushed us over the edge. That, and at that point, in part because of films like The Exodus, which sort of were, if you've ever seen the movie The Exodus, it was a classic propaganda film that typed Jews and Arabs modeled after the old Western. They were the good guys in the white hats and the savages. The good guys wanted to live in freedom and carve out a new land for themselves and their children, and the savages were stopping them from living and fulfilling their dreams. And that stuck in the American culture. And so I tell the story about my kids. One Halloween, going to school, my daughter was dressed up like an angel. My son was dressed up, I don't remember, like he had actually it was weird. It was cute, actually. We made a deck of cards, and so he was like in the Alice in Wonderland thing. He looked like that. And they're in the picture, and behind them were 3 kids who were dressed up like Arabs. One holding an oil can, another having a gun. You could do that back then, and it was innocent with the gun. And the kids came home and they said, "I don't want anybody to know we're Arabs, because it's not at my school, it's not cool." And so a month or so later at the school, they had a Thanksgiving thing where they were going to have all the kids bring their ethnic foods and dress in their ethnic garb and sit behind a table. My kids would not do it. They did not want to dress Arab. They didn't want to associate with the culture. We brought the food, and the table that was set was Israeli. It was Israeli food, and the girl standing behind the table had a dress on that was Ramallah. It was the pattern, the Palestinian each village has a unique pattern. And I thought, it's like, we're like the Red Indians, it's like they take the culture, and my kids are ashamed to claim it. And so when we started ADC, it was, damn it, we're going to reclaim the culture. We're going to be proud of the culture, and we're going to fight Hollywood, and we're going to insist that we not be defamed. I did a study. We took 5 years of TV shows, and we found only negative stereotypes, either the Arab as terrorist or Arab as oil sheikh. Not a single positive image, and not a single Arab American portrayed, except in some reruns of the old Danny Thomas show. He was Arab American, and he had a character, Uncle Thanos, his old uncle, Hans Conried, played him. He was just a delight. If you have an old Lebanese uncle, he was Hans Conried. We met with CBS, we met with ABC, and we met with NBC. That's all you had to meet with back then. And just let me tell you this story, because we did the CBS, they didn't want to talk about it. ABC, they didn't want to talk about it. NBC actually did a great thing. They brought together their executive people, they brought together their writers, and they brought together directors. And the guy who was the most impressive at the meeting was Bruce Paltrow. You won't remember him. He did a show called St. Elsewhere, which was an Emmy-winning TV show, and his daughter, you'll know, is Gwyneth Paltrow. And so he was very gripped by this, and he said, I'm going to do something. And called me to say, I want to put a character on St. Elsewhere, which was a show about a hospital here in Boston. And I said, well, of course. I mean, you can't go to a hospital without an Arab doctor. I mean, it's like that's the brain drain of the Arab world, is filling the hospitals with Arab doctors. And so he said, great, I'm going to do it. Let me have my writers send you a script. So they sent me a script. I was stunned when I got the script. It starts with a limousine driving up to the hospital, and out of the limousine comes an Arab, and the way that it said was he was dressed in sheets. That was the term. Not Ku Klux Klan, but he was an Arab. And he goes into the hospital, and he goes first to the gift shop, and he takes a Playboy magazine and opens it up, and he says, I like this, we do not have it in my country. And so I called, the rest of the script was fine. He was a good guy, a nice doctor, and he was going to become part of the show. So I called the writer up, and I said, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. I said, what'd you do it for? And he gave me the same line as the FBI. He said, we needed a character that people would be able to believe. And I said, you can't use a stereotype to defeat a stereotype. It's not working. It's not helping. Anyway, that was the last season for the show, St. Elsewhere, and we never got our character. But that was the kind of issue we faced at ADC back then.
Those issues of stereotype and, just stubborn ignorance of Arab culture, of Arab American culture, but of the Arab world in general, have had really deleterious effects on the United States.
It had on look, our kids found it difficult to claim their heritage back then. It's different today. There's an entirely different culture on college campuses. Back then, it was a nightmare. Number one. Number two, it made us stupid as a country, because we saw the Middle East through the prism of that equation. And we had my book, Arab Voices, is about the myths we have about the Arab world. They're angry. They wake up at night hating America, go to bed at night hating America, wake up in the morning hating Israel, and watch Al Jazeera all day, or go to the mosque and hate America even more. And so when we started polling in the Arab world, what we found was that Arabs go to bed at night worried about their kids and wake up in the morning thinking about their jobs, and when they come home from work, they turn on TV and watch movies or reality shows, or they want to be entertained. Yes, they watch the news just like Americans watch the news, but they're not riveted to the news all day. And the mosque attendance rates are about the same as church attendance rates here, and people's focuses are on their priorities in the Arab world are healthcare, education, and employment. Those are the three things in most Arab countries that they think about. They don't think about America. America, they hate us because they hate our values. They actually don't think about you a whole lot. I mean, it's not like an obsession. When they do think about you, they think about how America screwed them. I mean, that's the reality of it. And so we got some makeup work to do. But the polling actually reveals a very different reality than the myths that we have about that region. And the myths have shaped our policy, and so that we see Arabs as two-dimensional stick figures. Without. It's Israeli humanity. We understand Israelis. They're real people. They suffer. They're creative. They do great things. Golda Meir said one time, she said, I feel so bad for the other side. Over here we have joy. We dance. We create art. Over there they do nothing but hate. And that myth stuck in the American mind. We don't see Arabs as real people who have joy in their lives and actually want to have a better future. And so if your name is Ahmed and you're a doctor in Cairo and you get up in the morning and you deliver 3 babies and you know, cure somebody of some ailment, it's not a news story. But if you strap a bomb on and you do, then it's a big story. And so the only news we get is the negative news, and that reinforces the stereotype. And so those are the issues that we've had to contend with, and it's taken a toll on our kids and on our culture. It's taken a toll on our ability to function sometimes, but it also takes a toll on how we behave in that region. When you don't understand them as real people, you don't treat them as real people, and it's part of the problem of our policy.
One of the things that's most astounding, really, in the kinds of statistics that you cite in the book, and that are maybe well known, but I think we have no idea just how deleterious these have been, and that are the fact that the general level of education about, not simply about Arab Americans, many of whom are the neighbors of people in Iowa or Boston, but about the Arab world, the fact that we have so very few people, even after 9/11, who are really trained at such a level that they can communicate in Arabic with 350 million people and the governments that represent them. A kind of what you call stubborn ignorance that I think has been enormously destructive, and that continues today, despite the fact that there's been an uptick in the study of Arabic, Islam, and Middle Eastern history.
Without getting into names, think back to White Houses, going back to the Reagan administration at least. You could go earlier than that, but my memory goes back to the Reagan administration. Think of how many people in key national security roles actually knew anything about the Arab world.
Yeah.
And you could, it's a couple of folks, and they've had a hell of a time trying to deal with it. Most of the people who are there are political appointees who just don't know. And it's true on the networks too. It's true on the networks too. I used to get called to do a CNN show, and they'd say, we want you to come on and talk about Iraq. And I'd say, well, fine, good, who am I on with? And they'd say, well, we're gonna be on with Bill Bennett. I'll say, what's Bill Bennett got to do with the Arab world? Iraq, he doesn't know anything about Iraq. Yeah, but he's from the right and you're from the left and you're both good talkers, and so it'll be a great show. And I'd say, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. That's it. Real lives are at stake here. People are dying. There's a war. Our kids are fighting a war that they shouldn't be in. Give me somebody from the right who actually knows something about the Middle East, and we'll have a conversation. But it just isn't the case. It just isn't the case. And so we're kind of stuck in this situation where we have a crappy educational system that at the primary, secondary level, and in most colleges that aren't Harvard, you don't understand the Middle East, compounded by a popular culture that creates stereotypes, and a media and political culture that reinforces those stereotypes. I mean, imagine the United States of America in 2016, and a party nominates a person for president of the United States who wants to expel Muslims from the country, who hasn't got a clue about the Arab world, and the libertarian says, what's an Aleppo, right?
Yeah.
And this is the United States of America, the superpower. And go back 2000, I mean, Barack Obama knew a lot about the Arab world. Actually, he was one of the few people ever elected president who actually knew about the region before he got elected. But that issue never was talked about during the primary process. He did speak to the Jewish community about it and said some really tough things, but it never became a subject for discussion. And frankly, I think that, given how much treasure we've expended, how many lives we've lost, how much of our prestige, our national prestige is at stake, etc., that we continue to elect people to White House, to Senate, to Congress, and we never talk to them and never grill them about it. So that if the educational system, the popular culture, and the media culture are at fault, the political culture is too. It doesn't hold them accountable for their stupidity and or their refusal to discuss it because it's too controversial to get into it. And so that's how you end up in a situation like we did with the Iraq War, where I always maintained that the big lie of the Iraq War wasn't the weapons of mass destruction. That was incidental. The big lie was that it would only take 6 months, that it would only take 60 to 90,000 troops, that they would greet us with flowers in the street and we would be liberators, and that a beacon of democracy would light up that would shine the whole Middle East. That's what George Bush said. I mean, that was the lie. And it was believed by people because we had no clue at all. And what happens when you don't know something is that you tend to see it through the prism of what you do know. So we understood Iraq through the storyline that we had from Paris, liberating Paris or liberating Berlin. And we said, oh yeah, that's what's going to happen. And then when it didn't work, we tried to see it through the prism of Vietnam. I remember I was on a show one time and the guy said something about Baghdad and it's going to be, we're whatever, he was doing that liberation thing. And I said, actually, no, for the Arabs, this is more like the Mongols. And he stopped and he said, what do you mean the Mongols? I said, that was the first army, foreign army that sacked Baghdad. Oh, I didn't know that. And I thought to myself, we're sending our young men and women into a city whose history we do not understand. How the hell are we doing this? Don't we respect our own lives, not to speak of the lives of the people whose city we're invading? And so this issue of just not knowing is critical to the mistakes we make and the price we pay because we just don't know what we're doing.
Well, let me just say, over the decades, I mean, you talk about the King Crane report after World War I. That was the last time that anyone bothered to find out what was happening and what opinion was actually in the Middle East.
What we didn't want to know.
They did. So they buried the King Crane report.
I always call it the first time we polled the Arab world, but it wasn't the last time that we polled the Arab world and we ignored the results of the findings because we didn't like them.
Yeah. So then 8 decades later, you're one of the only people who's doing a lot of polling in the Arab world and in the Arab American world. Just before we turn to everyone's questions, and we'll do that in a minute, but if you could say one or two of the most important things you're learning now from the polling that you're doing. I mean, clearly people must have some thought about the travesty of our current election. Or, other things. But what would be most interesting?
I think that one of the things that's most interesting is that Arabs have given up. There isn't a sense that it makes any difference in their lives at all. I think that the expectations created by Barack Obama and the letdown was so great that there's a sense that doesn't matter who you. I remember when in the early 1970s, I was campaigning for Milton Schaap in Pennsylvania. He was a progressive, liberal, progressive governor, and I was going out and I got my name, the list of houses I was to knock on. They were all my demographic. It was an older woman, lower income, and she was perfect target for Milton Schaap. He was providing Medicaid. He was providing government services, et cetera. I knocked on the door and I said, I'm campaigning for Milton Schaap and we want your vote. And she said, Sonny, she said, I don't vote. And I said, but Milton Schaap's going to do this and the Republicans are going to do that and Milton Schaap's going to do this and the Republicans. And she said, Sonny, I'm poor and I'm old. And I've been through Republicans and I've been through Democrats and I'm still poor and I'm still old. And so in a sense, that when we ask the question, who will make it better? And we give them a third option, neither will because it won't change. We get the third option as the answer. It just won't change. That to me is tragic. I had this discussion at one point with the president and he'd followed my polls over the time and whatever. And at one point he said, their expectations of me were too high. And I said, no, you created them. You created those expectations. And so I still think the Cairo speech was one of the great roadmaps, bad word sometimes to use these days because of its other connotations, but it laid out the problem and the solution and a way forward. And but we didn't do it. In a sense, the president buckled under obvious pressure from the right wing and obvious pressure from overseas, and it was unfortunate. But the reality right now is that that's, I think, what we're finding. The other finding that I always point to is that when we ask the question about American values, we found that we decided to parse it out. Because Gallup had done a poll and right after 9/11 and found that Arabs didn't like America. And so, oh my God, they don't like America. That's why they're bombing us. And so I said, that's like doing a poll of a woman whose husband she just threw out of the house for cheating, and doing a poll and asking her what she thinks of men. You know, that's not a really good question at that point, right? And so we said, let's parse it out. And let's ask about, what do you think about brothers? What do you think about fathers? What do you think about sons? The different ways that idea of man manifests itself. So we did the same with America. We said, what do you think about American movies? What do you think about American science and technology? What do you think about American people or culture or products? We got really high grades for all of them. Then we asked, what do you think about American policy toward the Palestinians? What do you think about American policy toward Muslims? What do you think about American policy and we did a number of them. And what drove the negative was not the values, because 80% of Arabs liked our values. They didn't like the way we treat them. They didn't like our policy. And so when you ask them, what do you think of America? What drove the negative was the way we treat them, because people at the end of the day will make their decision on you, not about how you see yourself or what you say about yourself or even what you do, but it's how you treat them. Arabs, in fact, like America. They're convinced that America doesn't like them. And that, I think, was, those two things, I think, the sense of feeling betrayed, but at this point also just having given up that America's going to make a difference in their lives. And so that's a tragedy. What's interesting right now is that the right wing is criticizing Barack Obama for not doing enough in the Middle East. Guess what? America's favorable numbers are rising. And they're rising because our footprint is, I mean, the region's out of control, and some think that, well, we might be able to do something, but not doing something, when the option is do something stupid or don't do anything becomes a little bit better, because it actually means that they can focus on the positive stuff. When we say, do you want America to bomb here or do this? They say, no, we already been through that. You guys don't get it right. Please stop. That kind of is what comes through.
Well, that's both discouraging and, but extremely interesting. So we're going to open this to questions from you. There are two microphones, here and here. When you ask a question, identify yourself, and these are not occasions really for little speeches, so you should have a question mark at the end of your question as well. So
yeah,
let's begin over here.
And here's the thing I learned when I had my TV show. Arabs tend to ask and answer.
Yes, so.
Or don't you agree that? And then go on. I call it a Chris Matthews question, but anyway, go on. So yeah, sorry, kidding.
Yes, sir.
It's not working. Oh, it's working. First of all, I just want to appreciate and acknowledge all the great work you've been doing for the American community here. So the question is, consider you being the most senior Arab American in the Democratic Party. You have been advising the administration, President Obama, for not intervening in Syria especially during the red pinkish line in 2013. After seeing what we have seen, the atrocities from the Syrian government and the suffering that have been concluded because of that, would you consider regretting that and maybe changing for the position in your stance for the next administration?
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and it has tormented me, to tell you the truth. I accepted and supported the president's judgment early on. Look, if we had not gone into Iraq, and with it, all of the destruction of human life in Iraq and American life, and the amount of money lost, the military is exhausted. You know how many suicides a day there are of veterans? It's 22 a day. You know that? 22 veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, Americans, kill themselves every day. We lose more lives in a year to suicide of veterans who are exhausted from post-traumatic shock and all of that than we did in both wars combined. And so I was supporting the president on that. And plus I thought that there was nothing we could do that would make it better, actually. But Aleppo has brought me over the edge. And I feel that, and we've actually been having some discussions with people at the White House about what are the options that we can do, because it's not just the regime right now, it's Russia, which is driving this engine. And I do think that what I don't want to have happen is the president draw a line and then let him cross it. And so there's got to be a line drawn, but a commitment to actually do something to make a difference. Because what I fear is that 3 months between now and the next administration will, I mean, you know, people always say it can't get worse. It can get a lot worse. And so I believe that something has to be done. I'm not clear exactly on what that is. We're talking about it and thinking it through. But I do think that something needs to be done to change the dynamic and create some mechanism that will stop the Russian impunity and the regime's impunity right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
You talked a lot about
Identify yourself, please. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm Philip Balsa. I'm a sophomore at the college and a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee. You talked a lot about disappointment in the Arab American community, and I think one of the biggest disappointments in this administration has been the Arab Spring and the failure of any country besides Tunisia to establish a functional democracy in the aftermath of it. So given what's happened, I have 2 questions. First of all, what are your thoughts on the prospects for democracy in the Arab world? And is there any bitterness about this in the Arab American community and among Arab Christians in particular?
Let me pull this apart a little bit. There was when I saw the scenes in Tahrir Square, I mean, I used to frame it this way, and with all apologies to what then happened afterwards. I used to say that Tunisia was like Connecticut. You know, Broadway plays, when they start, they try them out in Connecticut or in Philadelphia, and then they work their way to Broadway. I used to say that Tunisia was Connecticut and Cairo was Broadway. And it turned out that this was a play that succeeded in Connecticut but flopped in Broadway. And it was a huge disappointment. When we saw those kids in Tahrir Square, I mean, frankly, it gave us goose pimples. It was the civil rights movement, it was the anti-war movement, it was the Prague Spring, it was all the things that we had, from my growing up, had shaped my consciousness. It turns out that Egypt structurally wasn't ready to absorb that. And when we saw Mubarak step down, we thought they won, and they didn't win. The military won. And they retained control throughout. And so it was a disappointment, a huge disappointment. And it also, to some degree, it fractured the community in the sense that the community is a function of creating the community. It brings together diverse peoples of country origin, right? And also of different generations. And so we had people all of a sudden saying, you know, I'm Egyptian and I want to go to fight in Egypt, and I'm Syrian and I want to do this, and I'm, you know, it reminded me of the Lebanon Civil War when people fractured over fighting and, you know, getting all identified with the various sides there. And we would say to people, let's focus on what we can do as a community to move this forward. Don't import their reality, export what we've learned here. I went to a big meeting of about 800 Egyptians in Northern Virginia, and they were all talking about voting in the next Egyptian election. And I was saying, Egypt doesn't need your votes. You shouldn't vote in an Egyptian election because it's not your election. You're not going to live there and pay the price or live with the consequences of the choice that gets made. Egypt needs your expertise. It needs your investment. It needs your American know-how of having built enterprises here. Bring them back to Egypt and create jobs for Egypt. Egypt needed to advance its economy, and it never happened. It stayed a dependency, which is tragic. And so yeah, it's been a big disappointment, and it's been a fracturing experience, not a unifying experience. But do I think that it's inevitable? I do. I mean, I think that, you know, that this was a false start, but the energy that was created doesn't dissipate. It just morphs into different forms. And so I'm still convinced that 50 years from now, you know, a kid from Cairo is going to marry a kid from Damascus, and they're going to settle in the suburbs of Damascus. I mean, the region will come together, and it will take time, and it will take the building of the infrastructure of democracy, which means a middle class. You know, I would send you to President Obama's speech on the 2nd anniversary of the Cairo speech in 2011. He said the following. He said, we didn't start it. We can't direct it, and we can't determine its outcome. All we can do is help. And what the first help we have to do is give them the resources they need to build the middle class, which is the cornerstone of a democracy. And I said to the person sitting next to me, I said, this is not a speech to the Arab world, this is a speech to Congress to cough up the money to do it. Well, Congress wasn't listening, and they turned them down, but I do think that it will happen. We have to approach it differently. And just one last thought on this. Ann Patterson, who was ambassador at the time in Egypt at the time of Tamarrud, gave a speech that she was roundly criticized for it because she told the young people, don't go into the streets. Build a political party. Go door to door. Do the hard work of building the infrastructure of a political party that can win the next election. And in hindsight, I think she was right. I think she was right, because all that Tamarrud did was give the military an excuse to seize power, not to seize, they always had power, but to make public their seizure of power and squash the democracy. If the steady, slow process of building an alternative political force had taken place, which I hope is taking place now in Lebanon, and I hope is taking place in Jordan, alternative structures need to be created. That is the only way that democratic change, progressive change will occur. Not through a violent uprising, and certainly not through the military imposing it. It's just not going to work that way.
Thank you.
But I think it will happen, for sure.
Let's go to this microphone.
Hello, I'm Farid Nemri. So we talked about having a lack of knowledge about the Arab world and the Arab culture. In what specific ways, in addition to politics, can we reestablish or establish a better understanding here in the United States and in the West to an extent?
You know, I just did something down at the Baker Center in Knoxville, Tennessee last week, and they brought me into town and they said, we need more cultural programs on our campus where kids don't know anything about this. About a third of the audience was the local Arab community that was Iraqi and Moroccan and Lebanese and Palestinians and whatever. And when it was over, I said, you don't need me. You have all these ambassadors of the diverse culture of who we are right here in your community in Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places, right? You need to engage them more. They need to come into the classes and talk. You have to have kids partner up with them. And the education needs to happen in communities around the country. I mean, for sure, you know, I look at Saudi Arabia, they got like, what, 80,000 students here on campuses all over the country? Those students need to be empowered to be ambassadors in every community that they go. And the same with the Emirati kids, and the same with the Palestinian and Lebanese kids. The only way Americans will know us is if we go out to them. And if the way that the universities can help is by structuring those discussions. Not by bringing somebody from outside in, but by having the conversations on the campuses. And having the conversation, yes, about the issues. And I think some of the student movements working on Palestine are doing great stuff, but it's got to be broader and deeper about the culture, about the religion, about the heritage and the history. And you all can do it in a very authentic way, more authentic than a book, more authentic than, than any other form of education, because most learning comes through meeting. At the end of the day, people will say, I got to know about them through him. And he opened my eyes and made me understand that this is something I needed to know more about. So yeah, it can happen, but it's got to happen with us.
I have my eye on the clock here, and what I'd like to do is to have two questions. If from this mic and that one, we would ask questions, and then we'll gather up a couple of questions and then go from there. Yes?
Excellent. Thank you. My name is Hamad Zahawi. I'm the Harvard Arab Student Association president, and I'm Iraqi-American. I'm a Kennedy School student, mid-career, Master's in Public Administration. After September 11th, there was a loss of identity among a lot of Arab Americans, especially in the school I went to, where a lot of Arab Americans kind of assimilated into becoming Latinos or Caucasians almost overnight, everything but Arab American. And I think we fought really hard to do what you try to do, which is really reclaim the identity, give them a sense of vestiture into the region. And we made strides. A lot of Arab Americans came out and voted for Obama. Obama's elected. The Arab Spring happened. There's a lot of hope. But since then, we've been taking a lot of steps back and so forth, and this has been even more glaring in the recent election. What went wrong? That was my first question. The second question is, what are your expectations should Hillary Clinton be elected? What would be your expectations of her for the Arab world and for Arab Americans? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to hold that question. That's a big one.
That's an easy one.
That's a big one. Okay, let's move to this mic.
Hi, my name is Hala Ahmed. I am a senior at the college and a Palestinian American involved in Palestinian activism on campus, as well as the Harvard Islamic Society. My question is a question and an answer. I'm kidding. Basically, I actually want to get your opinion on the issue of not including a census category for Arab Americans and Middle Eastern background, because that is a central point for many Arab Americans, actually particularly post 9/11, and being treated as a different category than white and not having the same kind of experience of white privilege as German, Polish American might. And the second thing I wanted to ask about is actually the way in which the Israeli lobby silences Arab Americans' voices in the in Congress, and what are the kind of organizations that we have as Arab Americans that can compete with that? Where are our 501c4s? Where are lobbying groups? And what are successful ways for us to build that capacity to make our voices heard?
Boy, those are three amazing questions. Go ahead, try. We've got 5 minutes.
Okay. First of all, my email address is jzogby@aaiusa.org. Any question that doesn't get answered, you write me, and I respond to everything I get. You can also follow me on Twitter at JJZ1600, and you can communicate with me that way. Your questions first. We are not a race. And the category in the census serves two purposes. One is a national count for the purpose of Congress to decide where appropriate, how many people, how many states, how many Congress people go for each state for reapportionment. And the second reason is because with affirmative action, they needed race categories to determine the appropriation of funds for groups that suffered from systemic discrimination. I have some issues with some people in the community. I do not believe that we suffer systemic discrimination. We are not African Americans. We are not Latinos. We're not Native Americans, and we're not women. These are groups that require affirmative action because, in fact, there are reasons why they have been held back. We have not been held back. We've had discrimination, and I chair the Ethnic Council in the Democratic Party, and God, the Italians and the Polish and the Germans will tell you stories. I mean, we know about the internment of the Japanese after World War II, but we don't know about the internment of the German Americans and the Italian Americans. They also suffered a horrendous fate. And you talk about people losing their culture. An entire generation of Germans had to completely forget and write out. They wanted nothing to do with their heritage at all after that experience. And so I do not want to see us compete with a limited pie with blacks and Latinos for a slice of that pie. Partly because I don't think it works that way. I mean, affirmative action needs to be fixed, but not by adding more people into the mix, number one. Number two, the trajectory of our community is, I mean, Yemeni farm workers that I was working with back in the 80s, today their kids are doctors, lawyers, engineers, you know. Palestinian grocers that I was working with, you know, back in the 80s when I was organizing the grocers for Jackson, today their kids are, you know, are professionals of all sorts. And the guys went from little stores to big stores and sold them finally, the little stores, to the next generation, the Koreans or the, you know, the other folks who moved in to own those little shops. We do need a
We only have 2 minutes to address Hillary Clinton, so we better.
We do need a category, and I'd like to talk to you about the category, and we've written on that in our institute. But I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
I do want to talk about the Israel lobby, but we can do that after. The Hillary Clinton. You know, you don't just elect a person, you elect a coalition. And our coalition, who fights for us in civil rights? Who fights for us for peace? Who fights for us for justice? It's African Americans, it's Latinos, it's progressives, it's gay lesbians, it's all of the people who are in the Democratic coalition. And if we want them to be with us, then we got to be with them. And so, yeah, I got differences with Hillary Clinton. I supported Bernie Sanders, and when you talk about, you know, disappointment and stuff, Arab Americans who had been quiescent came out in droves for Bernie, and it excited people. But frankly, that excitement should not be squashed. It should be channeled now into the coalition victory of progressives who will not discriminate against us and who may not have the right policies, but who at least are part of a coalition that we can fight with and work with to make the positive change. And so to me, it's not just the person who gets in, but it's the coalition around that person, and we need to be part of a progressive coalition for change. That's my take on it. And I've got a minute left, and I think that's it. Write me. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you have, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. This has been a fascinating evening for me as well. Thanks, Jim. This has really been great. Good.
Thanks, guys.
There we go. Don't forget your pen and paper here. That's good.
70.